This is the first one. Friendly Web says, I currently have a client who is ranking organically at 4 for their main keyword, but when searching in maps, even when spoofing the GPS location set to their location, they don't even show up in the maps results. What is the best way to address this? And will a branded Google stack optimize for the keyword, having the GMB map embedded in it, push things along? Thanks in advance for all that you do, Heath. I mean, that'll help, but you have to also work on the Google My Business itself, the profile itself. I mean, there's a whole long list of stuff that you can do to the Google My Business profile. The Drive Stack and the SEO Shield, the G Site, all of that will help because you're strengthening the entity that way. So something that you want, there's a lot of things that I don't know about this, right? So it's kind of hard to tell you. That will help, there's no question, but I can't say that that's all that's going to be needed, because if your GMB listing is ghosted, in other words, you're not able to find it in maps at all for then there's probably other issues present besides just the entity strengthening the entity. I'm sure Marco will comment on this, is one of the most important things. But that might not be the only thing that's caught, you know what I'm saying? So having just the SEO Shield is certainly going to help, but it might not be the only thing that needs to be done. There's probably other issues that need to be addressed. Is it ambiguated? Is it too closely related to another business out there, perhaps in name or perhaps in proximity? There's just a number of things that could be causing that. One of the, just to clarify, for example, one of the processes or methods that we were teaching several years ago, we called it the local lease pro method, which was to identify, and there was a specific technique we used to be able to identify areas that had little to no competition for GMBs. And so it was very easy to go just start registering GMBs in those areas and getting them to rank almost with little to no effort. But what happened was I would, target perhaps like a city, and I would try to pick, various locations within the city, sometimes just by zip code. And I would get GMBs in those areas that looked like there was little to no competition in that specific zip code. Well, what occurred was, after doing this several dozen times, I found that, a handful of listings or percentage of them would be ghosted, like what you're describing. They just wouldn't. It's not that they were suspended. They were published, but you couldn't find them in maps unless you visited them directly. And what I'm finding out was that it was kind of being filtered out by Google because the brand name was too closely related to, in other words, if it was sharing the same brand name as the other locations and they were too close in proximity, Google would filter one of them out. It would choose the more dominant one and allow that one to show in maps, but the other ones it would filter out. You couldn't find them in maps. You could visit them directly. They were published, but you couldn't find them in maps if you tried to scroll through all the different results, even zooming in and zooming out, which sometimes will reveal a GMB that's been ghosted or pigeon filtered out. That was kind of something that happened several years ago. But if you did a zoom in or zoom out, just one click, either zoom in or zoom out, and then bring it back to its original zoom, the maps listing would appear. But so that was a way to determine if it was being filtered by the pigeon update. And there's ways to overcome that as well. But that is the first step, or a good step in the right direction. It obviously is to get the SEO Shield to kind of strengthen the entity, increase your entity footprint, all of that. But you have to validate that entity as well. And again, that's a good step. But there's probably other issues that need to be addressed as well. Marco, do you want to tackle that one too?
Yeah, because there's so much that could be wrong with this. Just getting the information that we're getting here isn't nearly enough. But what I would start with, what is that Friendly Web, is do a brand search, just the brand or whatever. Suppose, see if it pops up with a knowledge panel, and if it pops a knowledge panel with some of the social media and some of the posts and everything else. So see how well the entity, the branded entity is doing. Once you do that, and so if it appears, then the next step would be to do the brand plus that main keyword. Do a search that way to see if the brand pops up, if a map pops up with your brand, or if it pops a knowledge panel, because it still should, because you're searching your brand. If it doesn't, then there isn't enough brand plus keyword association there. That's usually entity. You haven't done enough with the entity, enough to relate the entity to the keywords in the set so that the main keyword gets associated to that brand. The way that we start doing that is, yes, the SEO shield, but also schema, good on page and schema. Do you have a category on that page, excuse me, on that website, a category with supporting posts specifically targeting that keyword and the related keywords in that data set? And I say keywords, but we shouldn't focus it that way, right? We should be focusing on the entity and the related keywords or the related words in that data set, the related entities, the relevant entities in that data set, because that niche, all it is a category in a database with a data set that's related to that main entity or that named entity. And so when you have that, now we're scientists, because now we have to determine how it is that we're going to relate all of this. It's exactly what we show in the Heavy Hitter Club, how all of these different relationships are created through schema, through proper on page, and then off page, through the syndication network, through the Drive Stack plus G site, through the entity stack, what we used to call the ad ID page, which all it's an iframe stack with everything that's related to the entity. Once all that comes together, then you can hit that with a press release to further cinch, right? To make it stronger. But the only way to know this is we start with brand, then brand plus keyword. And as you do this, it's a process that can take months to get this right. If there's any ambiguity that's filtering into all of this. So I have no idea what your client has done. I would have to look at it all to be able to even say, these are the steps that you need to take to fix whatever ails this, because it's not appearing in the maps. And if it's local, then it definitely should. And even if it isn't local, it should appear in whatever map or whatever, wherever the entity is located. The centroid of the entity is what it's called. Wherever that's located, it should appear at least in that vicinity. Now, spoofing isn't necessarily going to work. You might have to even hire someone locally to go in and start doing searches from the centroid, from the business location and outward, or even if it's a spoofed business location, to see if it starts appearing locally. You have to see what Google is doing to someone who is actually there with the GPS turned on in the phone and what they're getting in the searches. There isn't a simple fix. Okay, I'm going to go and get an SEO shield and it's going to fix all my problems. It could, but then again, it might not.
Yeah, a couple add-ons to that. Two things I would recommend is the GMB website. That's a really important part of that as well, especially for the GMB itself, like the map issue not ranking. So when you do a brand search, as Marco mentioned, to kind of check the strength of the entity itself, the Google My Business website should be ranking on page 1 for that as well. If it's not, then that's something you should focus on. Fleshing out the content more on the GMB website, making sure that it's tuned, entity tuned, or tuned for SEO entities and such. Build links to it, like the actual GMB website, as well as to the maps listing, preferably the CID map URL. And Marco mentioned a press release. That's one of the best ways to do it. What I would recommend with a press release is to build the keyword anchor. So your exact match keyword anchor to the map URL, the CID map URL in the press release, because you're going to get like 250 or plus anchor text links that way. And the GMB map URL can take that. Only, a percentage of them are do follow anyways, but the point is that you can kind of start to push that map a little bit that way. I've done some testing with that and that works well, but then do the brand search or the brand name anchor text to your GMB website. So in your press release, in this case, I would recommend 2 URLs, one to your GMB map itself, the CID map URL. So that's the best one for link building purposes, for SEO purposes, that with an exact match keyword anchor. And then one for a brand anchor to your GMB website, if that makes sense. So 2 outbound links in your press release. And that's going to kind of help to strengthen the Google My Business assets for your brand, if that makes sense. And so that's what I would recommend you doing. And lastly, CT manipulation or click-through manipulation. That's something that you can do either with tools that work. The only tool that I know that works, because it's the only one that I've used, is Michael Bowe's Viper tools. Another one that I've been using for years is Google Ads, setting up Google Ads campaigns with the display network or display ads. You set it up as a maximize clicks campaign, and you can set localized searches within a very tight geographic region. And then especially if you can buy traffic from a known audience, a relevant audience within Google Ads, like an in-market audience or whatever, an in-market segment as it's called now. That's another great way that you can start to kind of strengthen that entity and force Google to recognize the brand. And also you can make some keyword associations there. That's beyond the scope of a free webinar. But if you want to learn about that kind of stuff, you can come join the mastermind, because I talk about that and teach about that in the mastermind. So those are some good questions, but there's probably a lot more to that than just what the little bit of details that we got here. So there's some things to set you in the right path anyway.
Yeah, but be careful. First, you have to determine what's wrong. I mean, you can't cure the patient unless you know first what's wrong with the patient. You might cut off the left leg, and then there's the right leg that needed to be cut off. So you got to be really careful when you start doing all of this. All of these things will help, but then again, that you might not get the results that you expect if there's any ambiguity in there. Because first you'll have to go and fix that and take care of that. Then you mash it.